Becoming the Man, Chapter 4, Mr. White Becomes the Man. As soon as Mr. White began to fill out the mountains of paperwork and confidentiality agreements, he realized he was in too deep to turn back. The majority of his first full week in Washington, D.C. was spent receiving security clearances, background checks, and going through a lot of red tape. It was as if the government had researched every aspect of his life, just in case something occurred in which they would have to use it against him. This, however, didn't bother him much. He figured it was just best to play the game and reap the rewards for doing so. He was a young man in a privileged position, and that was being able to have a chance to start at the top. He knew that Victoria had a taste for the finer things in life, and no matter how hard she attempted to play humble, she was accustomed to living a certain way. This was his ticket to providing those finer things while making connections on a national and maybe even international level. On Friday morning, Mr. White was finally in the office of Mr. Giles, who was to brief him on the complete details of his new top-secret job. Mr. Giles drew the blinds closed, sat behind his big oak desk, dialed 3 digits on his telephone, and said,
"Please hold all calls for me. Thank you."
He looked Mr. White in the eyes for a solid 10 seconds before he began to speak.
"Mr. White, you were chosen for this job because you have a certain quality, ability, personality, and temperament. By now, you must realize that by repeating anything I say to you in this room, it's a breach of national security and punishable by federal law. Even more so than that, it's punishable by an unwritten law, a law where people who break it disappear and are never heard from again. I hate to be that blunt, but you're a nice kid, and I hate to see anything happen to someone with so much potential. You'll be replacing me in my job, and it's my duty to train you. By now, you probably wonder, what is it that I do? Well, how should I explain it? Like they may say on the streets, well, I'm the man."
Mr. White tried to hide his own confusion while politely nodding. Mr. Giles continued,
"That's right. Like I said, I'm the man. I maintain a top-secret government position where it is my job to keep a balance between the races by implementing certain policies that make trends within Black America predictable and, most of all, unfavorable. The reality is, if everyone in America was a millionaire, who's going to shovel the shit? When the Founding Fathers planned and designed this very society, they didn't factor in African Americans being free within it. This country was built under the assumption that they were to be, how can I put it nicely, unhired help. Now, I don't want you to think I'm a racist, because I'm not. A racist can't do this job. It's not a job of emotion. It's a job of numbers and statistics. The careful balance of society, which allows us all who strive to live the American dream, even African Americans to a certain extent, is maintained by the work I do. I answer maybe to 3 people. I'm not sure if the president knows this department exists, but it has ever since the end of slavery. We needed something to make an unpredictable time in history, well, a lot more predictable. I've been equipped with the tools and technologies that you have to see to fathom. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm retiring because, well, after the whole Martin Luther King situation, we need someone who is part of the next generation to help shape it. Also, I'm tired. There's a lot of perks that come along with this job. Diplomatic immunity, plenty of money, lots of connections, but it's very consuming. You have to shut your soul off and understand what you're doing is dark at times, but necessary at all times. Are you following me?
Mr. White, still not knowing if this was some kind of test for the real job, nodded with a false confidence, but was still trying to understand what Mr. Giles was saying. Mr. Giles stood up and paced toward the side of the large desk and said, "I will teach you how to plant certain negative situations into African American society to keep the black man in a certain position that's crucial to the balance of America. Now you might ask, how can one man do this? Let's just say that every liquor store, every house of ill repute, every job that's offered or not offered to a black man in this country, it all comes through me. I'm the key to the black man in America's door. This isn't some test, my son. This is the truth. I've held this position for many years. Take, for example, if you go to Detroit, did you ever notice that if you go to Cleveland, Harlem, Chicago, Los Angeles, Memphis, and so forth, what will you see? Go to the part of the town where the darkest people live, and that will be the worst part of town.
We set the social conditions that cause these things. We set them up. Not so much in a political way, more in a way that ties into the need for certain socio-economic conditions. Picture the world like one of these shopping malls, and each country is a store selling a resource.
He continued.
Some stores have great locations where all the traffic is. Some have a resource that other stores need just to operate or just to keep the lights on. Some of the stores really own some of the other ones, with others competing fiercely. We play into all of that, but we don't do the numbers. We just help the higher-ups achieve their numbers and their goals. If there were no thieves, there'd be no mall security. Even the negatives generate money in our business. Do you see what I'm saying, son? Do you understand? Our founding fathers were slave owners, and they never dreamt far enough into the future to imagine the black man being free. I have to stress that even though they might or might not have been, I am not a racist. I have a job to do, however, and I can't afford to look at the Negro in America as anything more than data that I manipulate a certain way to achieve a certain result. I'm sure there are people in this government who have my same job, but apply these tactics to Italian Americans, Native Americans, the Irish. The list might go on and on. I don't know them, and quite frankly, I'm not concerned with them. I'm only concerned with black America and how I can make the social conditions benefit the rest of America. Do you follow me?
Mr. White followed and understood everything that Mr. Giles explained because it really made sense. The thought of helping to keep such an important society balanced made Mr. White feel very important. He never even asked for it to begin with, and so much responsibility and power was falling into his lap. Mr. White felt that after the recent Martin Luther King assassination, the unjust killing of such a great man, for sure the higher-ups would want him to do more good in reshaping the fate of the black man in America. But later he would find that to be a naive assumption. "I understand, sir, and I'm excited to do a good job," responded Mr. White.